Welcome to the second weekly Fretboard Wizard Hangout. I am so pumped that you are here today. Today we have a lot to discuss. I'm going to give you a quick review on how to identify chord changes by ear, and then I'm going to go right into your questions. So let's get started. All right, welcome, and what the hell, one more welcome. Thank you for being here with us today, and of course, by when I say us, I mean Sir Noah Jacob Heckman Jr. the first and Levi Quila, back there, the man with the technical plan,
Levi.
Pressing all the right buttons.
Noah?
No,
Levi.
Tony?
Sorry guys, it's
Totally got that backwards this time. I messed that up.
I got Levi controls the teaching cam and all sorts of things.
Which, by the way, can you guys hear this time?
Yeah, this would be great. If you can't hear me, let me know. Let Noah know.
Yeah, let me know.
Just put in the comments whether you can hear or not. Just because our first crack at this was a little, it was a little bit silent.
I got to know streaming yet.
Last time it was a little rough, but yeah, it looks like we're good.
We'll see.
Jeannie Slabby says, wow, right on time, which I agree with.
Which I agree. I mean, it's pretty hard to not agree with that.
But there is a delay. There's usually like a 20-second delay.
Right.
From when
Dan says that we Hain sound. I'm assuming he means have.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
Cool. Loud
Perfect.
and clear.
Loud and clear.
All right.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive in. So here, just a quick overview of what we're going to do today. I'm going to review this week's lesson, how to find the chords by ear, and then I've printed out some of the frequently asked questions from the lesson from your comments. So I'll get to those, and then we'll be spicing in some live questions as well. Noah's going to be looking in the comments. So if you have a question as I'm discussing things today, or maybe you just have one already, you just have this burning question, go ahead and put it in the comments below. Just hashtag question, and then Noah can go ahead and get that out of all the other comments. And speaking of comments, one more thing. We are going to celebrate some small wins and light bulb moments. So if you have had one this week or have one during the live Q&A, please share it with us. And I have to be honest, just in going through the comments this week, right on Monday when Lesson 2 opened up, there was a plethora of awesome light bulb moments and small wins. Stuff is even going back to the Foundational 5, saying that, oh my gosh, it's finally starting to make sense, which is so great to hear. And I love hearing those small wins. I love getting the questions. It's just keep them flowing, everybody, because this is material that is really going to break open a whole new world for you in terms of how you play, who you play with, your confidence in your playing, and what you understand musically. So the more positive we can be, the better off. And with that being said, I also want to mention another thing, that this journey it's not a straight line point A to B journey. For many of us, we're going to take detours, and we're going to be all over the place. Some lessons you're going to get them, and it's going to click, and it's going to feel amazing. Then the next lesson, you're going to be like, whoa, what just happened? I had all this good momentum. I should be getting this right now. Try your best not to have expectations on the time frame that this stuff will sink in. These are things and concepts that I've been working with for a really long time, and I still struggle with this very concept that we're going to discuss today, learning how to identify chord changes by ear. Although the framework is great, and it's really, really a solid framework, there are still songs that totally throw me for a loop. In fact, some of the challenges that I've seen you guys posting have been giving me a little bit of a reason to sweat. So don't, if you're not getting it right away, don't worry, have patience. We're building a foundation here so that this skill will come, and it will come with time. The more you practice it, the more you throw yourself in the fire, the better off. So let's quickly go over how to find chord changes by ear. And I've made this little chart here as kind of the outline for the workflow. So here's what we know. We know that in any major key, we have 7 notes that compose the major key scale. And those 7 notes result in certain chords and, of course, chord tonalities. So we know that whatever major scale we have, the first degree will result in a major chord, the second degree a minor chord, the third degree a minor chord.
Sorry, Tony, I didn't switch I was chatting, I didn't switch the camera.
I'll go ahead and start back at the one. So starting with what we know that any major scale has 7 notes. And those 7 notes actually result in chords because we're using notes within the scale to make those chords. We know that the first degree will result in a major chord, the second degree a minor chord, third degree a minor chord, fourth degree a major chord, fifth degree a major chord, sixth degree a minor chord, seventh degree a diminished chord, and then of course it repeats. This is a universal rule. Plug in any major scale here and it will give you those resulting chord tonalities in that order. This is great. So we identify the key by ear. That's step one. You're going through the song and you say, okay, I think this song is in the key of C. Upon further review, you do a little bit of digging, maybe play the major scale over it and say, okay, yeah, it definitely seems to resolve back to C. C seems to be the comfortable note here. So we've identified the key. Great. Then the next step is to identify the changes. Now this is a step that, well, with all of these steps, there's kind of a little catch to them, okay? So identifying the changes, essentially, you go chord change by chord change. So you're listening to the song, it starts on a C chord, great, life is good, and then you hear that, oh, okay, the chord changed, and it changed to a happy sounding chord. Well, if we look at the key, if we're on a C major, the one major chord, and it changed to a happy chord, that leaves us two options. So instead of taking, random stabs at chords, we've limited it to a 50-50 chance that we're going to get it right. This is pretty outstanding. Now, this is if it applies to the rule, which in most cases the songs stick within the universal rules, although I will say there are exceptions. And of course, vice versa. If you're on the one chord, the C major chord, and you say, holy cow, I think this, okay, I hear the chord change, and it changes to a minor or a sad sounding chord. Okay, great. You've just limited, again, you've limited your options from 7 chords, or 6, I would suppose, to 3 different minor chords. And in the lesson, I go through the order in which they will likely occur, the order of popularity. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but it's kind of the workflow that I use. So if it changes to a minor sounding chord, first I try the 6 minor. In the case of C major, that would be an A minor chord. Then I'll try the 2 minor. If that one didn't work, I'll try the 2 minor. And in the case of C major, that would be a D minor chord. And then I'll try the 3 minor, which in the case of C major would be an E minor chord. So you have these workflows depending on what change happens, what chord it goes to. You can start by process of elimination, really upping your chances of hitting the right chord. Will it happen correctly every time? Will you always guess the right chord every time? No. To this day, there are still songs that throw me for a loop. And to this day, I still will make the wrong guess, even if it's a 1 chord going to a 4 or a 5 or something like that. So keep that in mind. This is a trial and error. This is kind of we're trying to get the odds in our favor. Essentially, is what we're trying to do here. And that was a weak Hunger Games reference for the odds being ever in your favor. I have seen that movie. So,
Of course you have.
so upon once we've identified those changes and we think we have it, you start to evaluate the changes. Meaning you go through the song and you say, okay, is this making sense? Are these changes that I've identified and the chords that I think that it goes to, is this making sense? Or is something sounding off to me? So it's kind of a cycle, right? Once you've identified the key, that gives you the chords that you'll likely run into. Once you've identified the changes, you can start to go ahead and identify what is happening in those changes. What chord is it going to? And then, of course, evaluate it by playing the song. If you evaluate it and say, gosh, it's about 80% right, I think there's one thing that's thrown me off. Go back to identifying those changes. Now, I'm not trying to necessarily oversimplify the process. What I'm trying to do here is give you a way to approach a song confidently saying, okay, I at least have a framework to go off of. Because I know for a fact, when I was first starting to try and do this, I thought it was magical skill, number one. And I thought to myself, how in the world, with all the chords out there, can somebody sit down and within 10, 15 minutes at least have a rough outline of a song? I had no clue how that happened. Well, the framework provides that. Is it going to be correct every single time? No, and a lot of you have run into that, of course, with those exceptions, meaning we're bringing in chords from outside the scale, the most popular of which being the flat 7 chord and the major 2 chord. So that's kind of our quick overview for finding chord changes by ear. And I gotta say, I just want to say, first of all, thank you and congratulations to everyone who has gone through the lessons so far and even attempted the quiz, because this is a major skill. This is a huge skill to learn. It's a huge undertaking. And although we have this kind of lined out 3-step framework, it still can be very difficult because you're kind of out in the middle of music land with no nothing to hold on to, no anchor point. But I'm hoping that this framework can be your anchor point with that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some questions. Forgive our next door neighbors if you can hear the vacuuming, because they seem to be doing some sort of winter cleaning at the present moment. But hopefully that's not coming through too loud. So a couple of these questions will go back a little bit, but the majority of the questions were pulled from lesson 2, which was finding chord changes by ear. And that's what I really want to focus on today. And there were some fantastic questions. Going back, Gregor asked this. This was on one of the foundations, or rather lesson 1. He said, I was getting caught out by similarity between the keys of G and C and the keys of D and C. So I wrote out the keys G, C, and D. I found that these notes paired up at the 1st and 4th degrees and at the 1st and 5th degrees of each scale. Since the 1st, 4th, and 5th degree are most often selected chords for a song, it's easy to pick the wrong one. I'm looking forward to the Q&A to see how we can pick the right one. Well, this is really an interesting topic because as we were trying to find the key, it was very apparent that oftentimes it would come down to 2 particular notes. And I'll go back and refer to our chord matrix here. So let's say the song was in the key of C, and you think, okay, well, I think it's in the key of C, but man, G works really good as well. How do I tell the difference? Well, here's the bottom line. The G chord in the key of C holds different emotional weight than it does in, say, the key of G, or in, say, the key of D. Let me grab my guitar and show you. So if I'm playing in the key of C, I will play C, F, and G, the 1, the 4, and the 5. Okay. So that was a G chord in the context of C. So let's play that same G chord in the context of G. It kind of sounds a little different. It's the same chord, but because of the context, I'm not sure where you're telling me to move.
Just move your coffee cup.
Oh, my coffee cup. Okay. I kept shifting in my seat. I was thinking Levi wanted me to move this way, but it was the coffee that was in the way. So the context that surrounds the chord gives it its emotional weight. Again, I'll do that example. So a G chord in the key of C sounds like this. A G chord in the key of G sounds like this. Right? It's the same chord composed of the same notes. It just has a different position in the scale, therefore it has a different emotional weight. I'll give you one more example. I'll play the G chord in the key of D, which happens to be the 4 chord. So that's going to be... So that's how you can ultimately tell, gosh, is it the key of C or G? Well, G in the key of C holds a different emotional weight. So essentially what you're looking for when finding that key is what note is the song always drawn to? And this definitely takes time to develop, and that's why I gave you those major scale patterns and the minor scale, kind of the test patterns. So once I figure out what key it is, I'll go ahead and noodle through the scale. In the case of C, it would be down here. I'll just do that, but if I stop on a different note, in this case, even if it was the C or the G, it'll still feel like a pull towards that C note, especially if the song is indeed in the key of C. That was a great question, Gregor. Now, I wanted to say this too. Gregor, thank you for all your help on the comments and just in helping your fellow Fretboard Wizard classmates. This is Gregor's second round through the material, and it's cool because he's actually identified some light bulb moments that he's had, but also new questions that have been coming up as well. So kudos to you for going through for a second round. Going on with the questions, John Y. says, I have questions on the foundational 5 sections. It really did not sink in. I get how to find the scale on an individual string using the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern. Is there a pattern when using multiple strings, say in the first position, up the neck? Will this be covered on Wednesday's Q&A session? Well, to answer the last part of your question, yes, here we are covering it. So what John's asking is, okay, so on a single string, we can go ahead and make a major scale. That's great. It's a great concept to be able to see those distances in between the notes. In the case of E, that's awesome. We have that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Excellent. But how useful is that single string scale? Well, it's useful in the sense of understanding the concept. However, in the terms of playing, it's really nice to be able to play, say, an E major scale in one spot. So this is, we're getting a little bit ahead, but I just want to mention this because I'll say that the stadium light bulb filled moment is coming. Because in the improv framework exercise, I'm going to shed some light on some scale patterns. But my short answer to your question is that scale patterns essentially take this concept and condense it into a little pattern that we don't have to move our hand a lot. So by virtue of the pattern, it takes into account that recipe of whole and half steps. Now, that's not to say that you can't necessarily figure out your own scale patterns, which in this case, John, I would encourage you to do. Because we have that major scale formula. That's great, but again, a single string doesn't do much for us. So what if we go and we think, I'd love to switch strings right here. Well, okay, if you don't know where that note is on the next string, in this case the A string, go up one fret and be like, okay, well that's a E to F, F to G, G to A, A to B. That's a B note. So where's my B note on the A string? Okay, well there's my B. So if I go, you can start building your own pattern and ultimately switch strings whenever you want because you have the power to go ahead and find notes on other strings. And even if you don't know what the next note in the scale is, use that single string as a reference, kind of as your guidepost, and then you can create convenient scale patterns that you'll memorize. It's a fantastic question.
Light bulb moment from me. Right
Light
there.
bulb moment for you?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
That's
For
awesome.
you personally, Levi? You
Me
weren't leaving it?
personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Levi. I appreciate that. So Michael P. asks, I was working through the bonus major and minor scales you provided and noticed the major pentatonic scale was the pattern whole step, 1.5 steps, whole step. The minor pentatonic scale has the pattern 1.5 steps, whole step, 1.5 steps, whole step. Is there a name for the 1.5 step or is it just a minor third interval? So I'm going to address that. This is kind of a compound question. I would still refer to that as 1.5 steps because when we talk about a minor third interval, that's more of a harmonic or stacked relationship as opposed to a linear relationship. So whenever I talk about scales, I'll talk about the distance from one note to another note, in this case 1.5 steps. Whereas if I'm talking about chords, the distance of 1.5 steps is a minor third interval. So I would stick with the 1.5 step designation here. But to go further, he said, I was also trying to figure out the notes for the scales. I came up with the C minor pentatonic scale as C, E flat, F, G, A sharp, and C for the minor pentatonic. Is that correct? Or should the A sharp be a B flat? If so, why? Fantastic question. So let me just go ahead and write this out so we all know what we're dealing with here. So Michael says that he came up with the following notes for the C minor pentatonic scale. He said, cool, we have a C, E flat, what else do we have? An F, a G, an A sharp, and a C. Well, it follows the rule for the minor pentatonic scale, but we never mix sharps and flats. You'll never see this, okay? Even though there are tools to fix it, when we pick one, we have to completely ignore the other. So if we pick flats, we have to completely ignore sharps. They're no longer our fix-it tool. It's much like a Phillips head screwdriver and a flathead screwdriver. You're never going to go in, full bore to a standard screw and try and use a Phillips head screwdriver. It's the same idea. So in this case, I would opt for a B flat here instead of the A sharp because we don't want to mix those the sharps and flats, the accidentals. This still gives us that minor pentatonic scale, but it's way more musically correct. And of course, again, if we use a flat, we stick with flats. If we use a sharp, we stick with sharps. And even if it's the quote-unquote wrong choice, it'll quickly reveal itself why it was the wrong choice. If I just went through this and did sharps all the way through, you would see why, as to it kind of would lead you to a dead end. And then, of course, you could go back and pick the other one. That was a great question, Michael, and thank you for asking that one. All right, Mark T. asks, Noah, do we have questions waiting? Sorry, I get in the zone here and I forget to check in with you.
Yeah, we do have a few.
Okay, let me do Mark's question and then can I check in with you?
Please do.
Is that okay with you? Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, Mark T. asks, the ear training is already really helping me and I realize that it will be the key to real musical fluency. My question, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the spread finger pattern for the major scale, and for some reason it works well for me because I find that I'm more able to easily execute it anywhere on the fretboard and it doesn't change, regardless of the key, as it easily slides up and down the fretboard. Could you please tell me the spread finger pattern for the minor scale, if there is one? I confused myself trying to memorize the patterns for each position, and the spread finger pattern was a light bulb moment that helped me feel a little bit more in control and aware of my surroundings on the fretboard. So, this is a great question, and I will first say this, that there's a lot of different names for scale positions out in the instruction world, in the guitar world. And everybody kind of has their own spin on it. Some of them refer to it as pattern 1, 2. Some of them refer to it as, rooted on the low E string pattern, the pattern that goes towards the guitar body. So there's a little bit of confusion as to what scale pattern you're referring to, but I think I know what it is from our correspondence. And I think it's the 3-note per string pattern, and that looks like this. Right, so it's a pretty stretchy finger pattern, but I don't want you guys to get wrapped up in what that pattern is quite yet, because my answer to this is that you actually already know the minor scale pattern. It's built in to the major scale pattern. We just have to shift our perspective a little bit. So one of the universal rules that I like to consult here, hopefully I remember what page that was. That is not it. That is not it. That is not it. Maybe one more? 2 more. One of the universal rules that I like to consult is the fact that in any major scale, the 6th degree gives us our relative minor, okay? And that means essentially we have a major scale. Take, for example, the C major scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If we go to the 6th degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's A. A is the relative minor to C. So let's use this exact example. So I know a C major scale. So, okay, my C major scale that I know looks like this. Great, awesome. So we have our C major scale, and it sounds happy, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But within that scale pattern, actually I'll play the 2-octave pattern, it'll make more sense. So the C major scale that I know here. Great, awesome C major scale. So we actually, by virtue of knowing the major scale pattern, the minor scale pattern, the relative minor scale pattern is built in. So let's say, okay, great, I want to play an A minor scale, but I only know a major scale. That's not a problem, because we can do this. You don't even have to know the notes. You could just refer to it in numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All you have to do is play your major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to the 6th degree. Now, take that as your starting point. Once you have that, you actually have a little minor scale built into your major scale. So my challenge to you, this is a great question, Mark, and I appreciate it, and I think I commented on it as well. But my challenge to you is to take the scale pattern that you know, if it's this one, whoops, and go to the 6th degree, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the relative minor of your scale. So you can actually identify a minor scale pattern right here. That's it. Whoops. Okay. So within that spread finger scale pattern, you can actually go ahead and reverse engineer a minor scale pattern. Well, see, that's great, but how do I know the relative minor for every single scale? Do I have to go ahead and write that out every time? The answer is no, because once you've defined that minor scale pattern, it's now movable. Your root is right there on the A string, so you can move it anywhere. Say you want to say, okay, play an A minor scale pattern using that. Great. Or an E minor scale pattern, or a D minor scale pattern. So you can actually use the information that you already know and that you feel comfortable with, and go ahead and carve out your own minor scale pattern. Once you see the pattern, literally the pattern that your fingers make, identify the root, and then have that be your movable minor scale pattern. So I know it wasn't an easy answer, but I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of extra homework, and I think you'll have a major light bulb moment here. Great question. And Noah, I'm going to check in with you now, because I was going off on a tangent, and I want to see what everybody's asking.
You're so good at tangents. But your tangents are all
cosine.
always.
Sine. Yeah, totally.
Just full of goodness,
Yeah.
good knowledge. One comment in there, Terry, he said, "This is brilliant and exciting."
Awesome.
So it's pretty cool. Right at the end of your tangent there, Terry jumped in and he asked, "What is a diminished, or shall I check afterwards?"
Great question. So actually, this was one of the questions that somebody had asked, so this will be a double whammy.
Sorry, guys.
So a diminished chord, okay? So in every single chord, or in every single scale, let me go back here. In every single scale, we know how to create a major scale. We know how to create a chord matrix. And that gives us the resulting chordal tonalities, the naturally occurring ones, I should say. So here we are, great. First degree major, second degree minor, third degree minor, fourth degree major, fifth degree major, sixth degree minor, seventh degree diminished. What on earth is a diminished chord? Well, technically, it is two minor thirds stacked on top of one another. Well, that's all great and well, but what does that mean musically? What does it sound like? How do we use it? Well, I'll explain. So the diminished chord is kind of like we can call it the creepy chord, okay? And I'll say that in understanding what a diminished chord is, I'm going to quickly tell you to almost forget it, but I want you to know its purpose for a very distinct reason. Okay, so a diminished chord. I'm going to go ahead and play through these triads. I'm going to play just a C, E, and a G, then a D, F, and an A, all the way till we get to that diminished chord. So we have a C, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. If I stop there, it's kind of like really unsettling. So if you ever want to introduce an unsettling feeling in any key, whatever key you're playing in, you would play that seventh degree diminished chord. And it has kind of an ugly feeling, right? It wants to go here. But instead, we're stopping right there. So it's almost like a cliffhanger almost. So here's a rule. This is a universal rule that I want to share with you that I think will help clear things up. I personally don't play a lot of diminished chords. I don't think of them in that way. I understand the concept of what a diminished chord is and where it sits in the naturally occurring range of notes and things like that. But the rule that I like to use here is instead of playing a B diminished, I'm going to play a 7 chord based on the 5th degree of the scale. So instead of playing a B diminished, I'm going to go ahead and run through that same exact thing. I'll do it first with the B diminished, and then I'll substitute that B diminished for a G7 chord. So here it goes. So we'll do C, D minor, E minor, F, G major, A minor, This should be a B diminished and then a C. Okay. Now I'm going to play that with a G7. It actually has the same notes in it, or some of the same notes in it. Let me explain. So a 7 chord, you probably have all seen 7 chords on chord charts or things like that. Essentially for a 7 chord, what I'm doing is adding the note that is a full step beneath the root of the chord. Okay, not the root of the scale, but the root of the chord. So to make a G7 chord, I would say, okay, it's got G, B, and D. I'm going to add the note that is 1/2 step behind G, which happens to be an F. I actually write this in a different color. So I'll go ahead and add that F note there. That is what creates a G7 chord. Okay, the G7, that 7 is an extension. We have that bass triad, and then we're going to go ahead and add another note on top of it. So we have G, B, D, and F. Well, this is the exact reason why I can go ahead and substitute a G7 chord for a B diminished. Because if we look at the triad of a B diminished, that is B, D, and F. Well, that same triad is within a G7 chord, which is a beautiful thing. And I find that much more useful. So the diminished chord is used to create tension right before a resolve, right before going back to the tonal center of a song. And that's its theoretical purpose. Do I ever consider playing a B diminished? Not really. I would actually much rather substitute a G7, or what we call the dominant 7 chord. It's a little bit more easy to communicate that way, and quite frankly, the shapes are easier to make. So whether that makes me lazy or not, I don't know, but that's the system that I use and that I find great benefit in, because it allows me to keep things much clearer. So if you wanted to play the naturally occurring chords in the key of C, you could do so as it's written here, or you could say C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, G7, and then C major to wrap it all up. Whew.
Do you want to give a little quick quick explanation, contrast between how diminished and augmented fits in there?
Well, I always look at those, I'll call them different named chords, as extensions or flavors. I don't think that, I don't really think in terms of those terms. I never think of an augmented chord, a major 7 chord, a 7 chord, a suspended chord, a diminished chord. That doesn't really, I'm not undermining the value of those terms. I'm saying the way that I try to keep things straight. If I keep these bass triads in check, I can go ahead and then add whatever note here. And in a lot of times, the way that I play and the way that I approach music is that those additional notes are flavors. And oftentimes, I'll play a chord that I like the sound of, and I'll have to reverse engineer it to figure out what the heck to call it. I don't say, oh, this is a great spot for an augmented chord, the great spot for a diminished chord. I play the chord that fits the bill, and then I say, well, I like the sound of it. What is it? So I reverse engineer it. So I don't really think in terms of naming the chords right off the bat. If I find something that I like, then I'll kind of do a little bit deeper dive.
Yeah.
Now the augmented, we were talking about this last Q&A. Is that 2 major thirds?
Is that what we determined?
I think that's what we determined.
Yeah.
But I can't remember. That's one of those things that if I run into the situation, I'll go ahead and do the research to figure it out, but I won't try and remember it because this brain only has so much capacity.
Yeah, Sid, is that correct? Make a comment about the augmented there, Sid. Oh man, we got some light bulbs coming in. Can I throw those out there as we're going?
Sure, absolutely.
John said thanks for covering his question.
For sure.
Light bulb moment here, and he's looking forward to a stadium light bulb moment.
Good.
Christopher got the dominant 7 light bulb.
Awesome.
Mercedes light bulb with the building of the G7 chord.
Cool.
Let me throw in there real quick. Pete asked Tony, what's the Martin you're playing there?
This is my 1935 single 017 with the Santa Cruz strings that I've been bragging about that I still totally love. This guitar has a whole new voice because of those strings. But this is one of my faves, my main guitars. It's got some battle scars, but I love it.
All right, so Lenny had an interesting question, and he did review last week's. You know,
Okay.
and we talked about how the minor fits into the chord matrix.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
do a matrix for the minor?
Yeah.
His specific question was, and he's going to go rewatch again,
Yeah.
but he said, so he said, I thought last week covered how to create the minor chord matrix, but not which chords were major versus minor.
Okay, I think I have what you're saying.
Okay.
So the ironic thing is, well, I get confused at which camera to look at. The ironic thing is that, let's see if I can find what I drew last week. Actually, well, yeah, here. I think that's it, but it's the same thing. So again, just this major minor relationship in terms of scales and keys. Okay, we have here in front of us a C major scale. Now, and that gives us a certain arrangement of chord tonalities, right? We've been discussing that almost this entire Q&A. And earlier in the Q&A, I said, okay, another universal rule that I want you to be aware of is that the sixth degree of any major scale will be its relative minor, meaning the same notes are used to compose the chords within that minor key. So, for the key of C, obviously we start on C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sixth degree, A, is the relative minor. So if I ignore this for a second. So if I go ahead and write the same notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A, I can say, okay, well, that's my minor scale. That's an A minor scale. Great. That gives me the universal recipe for a minor scale pattern. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. But I can also create a chord matrix from that using the first, third, and fifth degree. Okay, first degree creates the first row, third degree, the second row, fifth degree, the third row. And the beautiful thing about this is this also gives us the chord tonalities in the key of A minor. So now we know the naturally occurring chords in the key of A minor. The first degree will always be minor, the second degree always diminished, the third degree always major, fourth minor, fifth minor, sixth major, seventh major, and then back to minor as it repeats. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that these are the same chords. Just like the relative minor scale, it's the same notes, just in a different order, different starting spot, different ending spot. It's the same thing for the chord tonalities. It's the same exact thing. So if we look back to the C major chord matrix, we're just starting on the sixth degree to figure out what the order of naturally occurring minor chords are. So one of the big things that I want to stress here, and I'll just leave that up so you can check it out. One of the big things that I want to stress here is that there's a lot of statements like I should be learning the modes, I should be learning minor scales, I should be learning fill in the blank. And the whole notion of, well, at least I'll back up a little bit. The way that I like to remember things, or the way that I like to approach memorization, is I like to try and remember as little as possible, but get the most use out of it. So in the case of this major versus minor thing, if I know that all I have to do is remember, get a major scale, go to the sixth degree, that's my relative minor scale. That's how I go the minor route. I actually start in the same spot, and I do so for all the different modes and all the different routes you can go in terms of scales and chord creation. I always start with the major scale because that's the basis for me. Everything I remember is based on that, so I don't have to think, well, gosh, what was the arrangement of whole and half steps for a minor scale? I guarantee you, I probably couldn't rattle that off right now. But I'd go to the major scale, look at what I have, go to the sixth degree, start there, and then I would go ahead and almost reverse engineer that minor scale. So I limit the things that I have to, that are like must remembers, into universal rules, and that one core thing that I can use to derive everything else. So once I have that, then it allows me to really, I can go deeper on the minimal knowledge that I have to remember, and not feel like I have to remember all these bits and pieces along the way. So I hope that helps. I hope that clears up that major-minor thing.
Yeah, well, Dan just says light bulb moment. So sixth degree is the relative major on a minor chord matrix.
third degree would be the, so yeah, so it actually works both ways. So if we go, you can actually write, if you guys are writing notes or what have you, and of course this will be available for replay, but if you look at any major scale, if you count to 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that 6th degree will give you the relative minor scale. Conversely, any minor scale, if you count to the 1, 2, 3rd degree, that will give you the relative major scale. So it's a two-way street. So hopefully that was more light bulb moments. Compound light bulb moments. Let me, no, unless there's a burning question just waiting. I've got a couple more here that I'd love to get to.
Please do.
Okay. This one is quick. Stephen D asked, and this is, well, I'll go ahead and read the question first, and then I'll get to the answer. I almost gave the answer first, as if you could read my mind. Stephen D asks, well, I could not do this E string thing with lots of songs throughout the week, listening to recordings of other music. I found I just listened to the music, I could play a few chords and match them with the chord at the song's first vocal chord, and then work through the 1, 4, 5 to make sure I'm in the right key. Yes, and sometimes the 2, 3, and 6 for a minor key. But I could not do it with this low E string method. Different strokes for different folks. Pun intended. I finally went for your quiz using my method and got 15 out of 15. I have to be honest here and saying I tried the E string method a few times and found I made some errors, but was saved by my erroneous Wi-Fi connection to fail, and hence I had to start over twice, saved by the fail. What I want to say on this, and the reason I selected this, is that these are methods. The method that I use to find a key and then figure out the chords are methods that work for me. Within the methods, if you find a workaround or something that makes more sense for you or something that works with your ear, great. That's a huge win. Just because it's not exactly what was discussed in the course, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It actually led you to your own unique way. And I encourage all of you that are taking this course to kind of try out these methods. If they work for you and send you on your way, fantastic. If they don't, but it allows you to kind of give you the confidence to carve out another way, awesome. That's great, because that's unique to you, and that could then be your approach to figuring out songs. So I'm not going to be like, oh, well, that was wrong. No, that's absolutely right. The whole notion is to give you guys a springboard into figuring out things by ear and starting to apply these theoretical principles that we discussed in the Foundational 5 to the real world. And it's not a cookie cutter thing. Everybody's going to approach things a little different. So that's totally fine. And I appreciate you leaving that comment, Stephen. That was fantastic. We kind of went over this next one, this question from Don, but I want to reiterate and focus just on the 7 chord here. The question that Don asks is, any suggestions for identifying if it is a 7 chord, as in A7 versus A major? I know they are fairly common, and it seems like they are mostly on the 4 and 5 chords. This is a great question, and the reason I chose this is because there's another universal rule that I discussed earlier today that I want to reiterate and also kind of shed some light on. So 7 chords. Here, we'll use the 2 chords that Don had called out here. And the first was, so we have an A major chord, and we have an A7 chord. Okay, 2 awesome chords that I love, A major and A7. So as you're trying to figure out chords, remember what I said. Did I do it here? Yeah, I did. Remember what I said when I was referring to creating a 7 chord. We take the triad. In this case, it was a G major, G, B, and D. We look to the root of that triad, right, the 1, and we say, okay, I'm going to add the note that is 1 step behind it, 1 step flat of it. So in this case, it would be an F. So G, B, D, and F. So essentially what we're dealing with 7 chords is that it's that bass triad plus another note. So if you go ahead and are working through a song and you think, oh gosh, I know it goes to an A major here, but I can't tell if it's an A7 or an A major. Don't worry about it yet, okay? The fact that you have that it's an A major and that's a correct chord change, awesome. That's perfect. Because you can go on, you can further refine your analyzation. Is that the right pronunciation?
Sounds great.
Analyzation of a song. You can further refine it and kind of come back with a fine-tooth comb and say, what are the little nuances that I'm missing? Because quite frankly, if you play an A major along with a song that's playing an A7, you're going to be dead on and it's going to sound great. But again, if once you have those changes, you can go back through a fine-tooth comb and say, okay, well, is that an A major or an A7? Well, here's how you find out. An A major is going to have a good solid sound. Any major chord for that matter. G, A major, D major, G major, whatever the case may be. But if it's an A7 or a G7 or a D7, any fill-in-the-blank 7, that's going to have this almost comfortable dissonance, I'll call it, okay? So an A major again to an A7 kind of has a comfortable dissonance. D major to a D7, again, comfortable dissonance, and the same thing with a G major. Right, it has this dissonance. But I want to get to the second part of your question. So to answer your first part, once you identify the chord changes, go back through with a fine-tooth comb and see if you can hear any of that comfortable dissonance. And say, okay, well, you know what? This is exactly what I'm hearing. I think that's a 7 chord. And then give it a shot. It might be right, it might be wrong, but at least you know what you're looking for at this point. And then as far as the 7 chords being common on the 4th and 5th degrees, this is a great observation. I'm so glad you brought it up, because oftentimes, if let's say we're playing a song in the key of G, and the 1, 4, and 5 chords are G, C, and D. All right. We're going through, and oftentimes when we hear that 7 chord come in, it's actually hinting at a chord change that's about to come, right? So if I'm going along, that move to the 7 chord, and I'm talking like a D to a D7 or something like that, should send up a little red flag if you're at a jam or something like that, like, oh, I hear what's actually about to happen. There's a chord change that's coming soon. So it's almost like it's almost telegraphing a chord change in a way. Totally optional, not necessary, but a huge, huge, enormous help if you're at a jam and you kind of have that knowledge, like, okay, 7 chords coming. We're about to change to a different chord here. So in terms of the 7 chord, let that be on your second iteration of analyzing a song. Okay, get the core chords first, then come back, see if you can identify those 7s. Chances are they will be occurring right before a chord change. Or a little caveat: if it's a blues song, those 7 chords are going to be used pretty frequently because it adds, again, that happy dissonance. So that was a great question, Don, and I appreciate you asking that one as well. And this goes along, actually, another member here, Gibson, asked a question: how do I figure chords that use a different bass note? Same concept here. The chord will be a chord will be a chord. No matter what arrangement this triad is in, it's going to be a C chord. It'll sound a little bit different, but I want you to identify that chord change first and then back out and say, okay, what's the musical situation here? A lot of times you can look at, say, a C chord to a G chord with a B in the bass going down to an A minor. Okay, that's a very common bass walk. And a lot of times when you look at a chord sheet and say, oh, okay, well, that chord is clearly a G chord, but it has a B in the bass note, chances are it's part of a bigger musical idea. In this case, it's a walk to an A minor. Right? So a C chord. That's kind of a cool change. Very common bass walk down, but you could also play that. Those changing bass notes just highlight a certain musical idea, and oftentimes it's some sort of bass lead or something like that. This is a great question, Gibson. Hopefully that cleared it up for you. Noah, how's it looking out in the world?
Beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Is it illuminated?
Yes.
Good.
It's illuminated. It's so illuminated. Yeah, lots of people are digging it. They're getting it.
Fantastic. Awesome.
And, well, here's one. What do we got here?
Thanks.
So as you were doing that little analysis,
yep.
Dr. Dave Just throws
What
in
did
the
you call it though? You didn't call it an analysis. You called it something else.
Analyzation.
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 Yeah, that was
okay.
Dr. Dave, by the way.
Okay,
I used it twice too. You guys didn't even tell me.
He's like, analysis?
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
And,
Analyzation, analysis, common dialect here.
And then he says, and those are dominant sevens, right? Versus major sevens?
Yes, great. That's a fantastic question, and thank you for bringing that up. So this actually this came up in the last iteration of Fretboard Wizard, the last live one, and there's all this question about, okay, well, we have a major 7 chord and a 7 chord. Okay, this is confusing. So what's the deal? Well, the recipe for a 7 chord or a dominant 7 chord is that you take the chord and add the note that is a half step behind the root. Again, in this case of the G, we're going to add an F to give it a dominant 7 sound. A major 7 is different, okay? So a major 7, instead of going down a full step, we're just going to go down a half step. So instead of adding an F, we add an F sharp. Let me show you on the guitar what that sounds like. So in the case of G, again, if we make a dominant 7 chord, G, B, D, and F, that F comes from going to the root, minusing a full step. That's going to sound like this. That's a dominant 7 chord. If we want to play a major 7, we take that same triad and say, okay, instead of a full step behind the root, we're going to go a half step behind the root. That's going to be an F sharp. So that's going to have a totally different sonic characteristic. It's going to sound like this. That's a major 7. Dominant 7, major 7. One of my favorite examples of this is if you use the D chord, the root is here on the B string, you can go D major 7, D dominant 7. And that gives you a good scope of the different tonalities that are introduced here. Great question, Dave. Thanks for asking.
Is that in Lion Eyes?
I think it is.
Is that?
I
am
think
right?
so. Well, actually, you know what? I'm glad you said that, Noah. So, of course, I'm trying to shed light on concepts and use examples that I am aware of. But if there's something that rings true to you, a certain song that has a certain sound, and you're like, oh, it's that major 7 chord. Or there's another one by, is it America, that one?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Those are major 7
Ventura
chords. So
Highway.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, that's my reference. So it's always good to try and pull the information that you're gathering here and say, okay, I get what Tony's trying to say, but I need to apply it to my musical world and try and find an audio reference or something, a song reference that's like, oh, that's that major 7 sound. So another one that I think is Gentle on My Mind, John Hartford tune, that is another major 7 reference for me. Anyways, that was a good point. No, sorry.
Yeah.
Another tangent.
Yeah, all I got in my mind right now is doodle-doo-doo-doo-doo. So thanks for that.
Well, I'm gonna keep digging in. We got about 10. Is it about 10 minutes?
Yep.
Looks like
yep.
about 10.
Yep, we're winding down. So
Okay. I am going to try my best to just blast through these. Greg says, I'm trying to separate out the chord changes within the music. Was a bit of a challenge. I was easily distracted by singing and other instruments. Tony, any words of wisdom to help isolate the chord changes? Yes. So you'll notice that I threw a lot of different musical variety in the quiz. Some songs were very guitar heavy and guitar up front. Other songs didn't have a guitar. In fact, the banjo and the mandolin actually took the big portion of the heavy lifting. And I did that on purpose. Because it's always nice to cue in on the guitar and say, oh, cool, instrument I can recognize with. It sounds like mine. Fantastic. I can find these chord changes. But not every song is going to present that opportunity to you. So here's what I would refer to, or what I would recommend. Whenever you're having trouble hearing the changes, most songs are going to have a bass player somewhere in there. Look to the bass, because the bass is going to be playing single notes and leading the chord changes. The bass is almost like the conductor of a symphony in a way. The bass is going to lead the chord changes. So if you can go ahead and isolate that bass and really focus your hearing efforts on that, great. Well, let's say you can't do that. That's okay. Listen to the lyrics, listen to the vocal melody, and see if you can assign changes to certain words or things like that. So it's all about, at this, some of these songs are a little dizzying because there's so much going on. So if you can isolate those changes and really chunk them down and say, okay, I'm just going to work on the first line. And when he says the word clouds, that's when the chord changes. So listen to changes in the vocal melody, try and isolate the bass, and then there's three things that I want to share with you, three tools that I think all of you would really, really find great benefit now that you have this information. One of them is a program, I think it's only on Apple, but I'm not 100% sure. It's called AnyTune, ANYTUNE. It is a slow downer that actually allows you to isolate certain bands of EQ, so you can isolate the bass. So these are tools that I use that I love. The other one is called Amazing Slow Downer. So anything with quick chord changes, you can go ahead and download this program, load in the music that you want to learn, and it slows things down. So music with very quick chord changes, maybe it's a bluegrass tune or something like that, you can slow it down to actually hear the changes. And then the last that I want to recommend that's actually available to you guys right now is it's on YouTube. You can actually adjust the playback speed on any video. So I think it's in the, Levi, you might need to help me out with this. Is it the bottom right?
I don't ever use that feature.
Really?
But I would assume it's the
I think it's in the
icon in the bottom.
Yeah, I think it's in the bottom right. You can actually adjust the playback. So any song that's moving along at a clip that you just can't keep up with and you can't identify changes, go ahead and slow it down. That's not cheating. Okay, there's actually no cheating in this. And really, as you guys are submitting challenges and things, after you try and learn a song by ear and identify those changes by ear, there's nothing wrong with going up and looking up the chord changes. That's okay. There's so much information out there. You should double check yourself and see if use it as almost like a contest. Be like, oh, if I got this right, I'm going to get an extra cup of coffee this morning or whatever your reward is. But it's not cheating. And the same thing is if you're going through the quiz and you think, holy cow, I've got 4 choices of chord progressions here, and I can't figure this out by myself. Use the information that's available to you. You've got 4 sample chord changes in front of you. Go through each one of those. It might take a little bit longer, but it's still you trying to discern what the chord changes are by ear, and that's the whole goal here. That's the ultimate goal. I'm going to try and crank through these. Oh man, I'm trying to. This one's a quick one. Ray asks, I didn't see if this was asked or not. Sorry if I'm repeating. Do we assume that a song is played in standard tuning, and does that factor in? The answer is actually it doesn't matter. If you're in an alternate tuning and you play a C chord, that C chord is still going to contain C, E, and G, and if you're in standard tuning, that's still going to be the chord, the notes you're going to play in standard tuning. So that's a very good question and a common question. Let's see. Roman asks, I am getting there by trial and error, as you did it would take on finding the key. But what if a capo is used? How would you find the key in playing a jam session where someone's playing with a capo and you're not? And would you use the same formula for finding the chords for that key as well? And my answer is absolutely yes. Just because the capo is on the guitar, that doesn't mean things change for you. It changes oftentimes for somebody using the capo, but you can still play along without a capo. In fact, that's one of the coolest things. And at this point, I'm going to just take a quick second and mention, for those of you with similar questions on how the capo interfaces with all of this stuff, if you are a TAC member, go to the Academy and check out the capo comprehension course. I don't want to overload you here, but I think it will do a way better job of answering this question than I can do in the short time that I have left here today. It goes through how the cage system actually applies to the capo, so it'll actually shed a lot of light on that, and it'll also give you a little bit of insight as to how to look at certain keys and look at things with a capo on the guitar that I think will definitely clear this up. So Roman, please check that out. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. If you find the key, it is the key, and you can play those chords whether somebody else is using a capo or not. Unless you're taking visual cues, of course. If somebody's using a capo and you're trying to mimic them without a capo on your guitar, that's going to be a whole different ballgame. Let's see. Got that one. A lot of these questions are duplicates. I just wanted to make sure that... let's see. Tim asks, understand how to find the key, and that was very helpful with an open fretboard. What if the song is played with a capo? I just read that. Sorry, that was me being. I'm trying to be very apparently redundant. Sorry, so I did answer that question, but there is another one. Oh, this was the one I wanted to highlight. Sorry. Again, this is also by Tim. He says, I was struggling with this a bit and asked my wife for help, and her suggestion was to play the bass note on the low E string to find the chords. This was in reference to finding chords by ear. For me, it worked better and made it easier to find the chord changes in a song by listening to the root. Thoughts? Absolutely. So if just integrating chords and trying out full chords isn't working for you, go to the single note route. Okay, it'll limit all the sound going on and allow you to really isolate the chord that's happening, and most importantly, its root note. So if you're in the key of C and say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure it goes to an F chord, but I'm playing the full chord, it's not really jiving with me. Go ahead and just play an F note and see if that even works, because that'll maybe give you a little bit more insight as to what that chord change will be. I got that one. Anna, this was a great question that I just saw before we went live today. Anna had asked about pentatonic scales. Now, in last week's live Q&A, if you go and look at that lesson, you'll see a download beneath the Q&A that's for some test scales as you're trying to find the key by ear. And she had asked, pentatonic scales, what's the deal? How do we create pentatonic scales? Well, I want you to think of pentatonic scales as almost the best of a scale. Okay, so let's say we reference the Eagles, so I'm just going to go with the Eagles reference. Let's say you're thinking, gosh, I think I like the Eagles, but I'm not ready to go out and buy every single album that they ever created. So what do? Well, you go buy the best of. So it's all the greatest hits to give you the span of their career and the hits that made the Billboard charts or what have you. Pentatonic scales are almost the same way. Pentatonic scales are 5-note scales, and they isolate the notes that are the best to use, are the least emotionally charged. They take out your likelihood of hitting a doozer note. So just real quick, I want to go over this. In terms of creating a minor pentatonic scale, I wouldn't approach it as I'm going to create a minor pentatonic scale. Again, I approach it starting with the major scale and saying, what do I need for a minor pentatonic scale? And for a minor pentatonic scale, you're going to need the root. You're going to need to take the third and flat it by a half step. You're going to take the fourth, the fifth, the seventh degree, flat it by a half step, and then it ends up on the root again. For the major pentatonic scale, this is a little bit easier. You'll need the root, the second, the third, the fifth, the sixth, and then back at the root again. So real quickly, whenever I'm creating a scale, I look at the major scale and what I have to do, how I have to manipulate it to create that other scale. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you guys here today. That being the case, I'm going to condense some of this into kind of some replay notes that you guys can refer to, some of the universal rules that I discussed and things like that. So if you're sitting there being like, whoa, this is great information, but it's like flying past me and hitting the back wall, don't worry. And of course, if it's still unclear, you can always ask questions in the comments on the lessons. Noah, that's it for what I have prepared today.
Yes, all is well. I tell you, every time people get going on something, and this time you mentioned the slow down stuff.
Yeah.
People are just cracking up, slowing you down, and saying you're like drunk Tony over here and stuff like that. And, and I'm gonna go do it myself.
Yeah,
after this.
I can't wait. I've been watching the comments and I'm like, can we be done? I want to go try that out on Tony's video.
Well, I just want to take this moment again and thank everybody for being here live with us today. If you're catching this on replay, thank you for catching it on replay. Hopefully your question was answered. If for any reason it wasn't answered, it's okay. You can still ask it in the comments. If for some reason you're like, well, I did ask and he didn't get it, just please repost the question, and please do so on the comments of the lessons or the quiz for that matter. It's really beneficial for not only you to get your question answered, but for everybody to see your question and then see the replies, either by myself or other fellow Fretboard Wizard members. It's really helpful because it provides answers and a little bit further insight that otherwise wouldn't be present on that lesson page. So please ask your questions on those comments underneath the lessons in the quiz. I think that's it. I just want to wish you guys the best of luck going into this next lesson that's opening up. If you're having problems with the quiz, it's okay to take a break. Please just if you're like, my ears are fatigued, I can't do it anymore, just take yourself a break and go ahead and come back to it the following day with a refreshed energy. And last but certainly not least, if you're feeling behind, just real quick, I saw a comment right before, again, we went live today. Victory had commented, she said, gosh, I'm feeling a little bit behind, but she had a small win. She actually picked with a fella in a park in Nashville, which I thought was really cool. It's okay if you're feeling behind or overwhelmed. The information that we're sharing here is going to be available to you. And I'm talking about the lessons, and I'm also talking about the replays. And I'm also talking about asking questions in the comments. So please know that this is truly at your own pace and that we're all coming through this at varying levels and that's okay, and it's actually additive. We're all helping one another out. So if you're feeling behind or like, oh gosh, they're on lesson 2 and this is the lesson 2 replay, it's okay. You can go back and watch the other replays. You can still ask questions real time during upcoming Q&As. So please don't put so much pressure on yourself that it doesn't make this course fun. I want this course to be a fun and, of course, enlightening experience. So with that being said, thank you for being here today. You can catch this on replay. If I was talking too fast, it's the coffee's fault. And from all of us here, thanks for joining, and I'll see you guys on the comments and in the forums. And of course, don't forget to do your song or your I'm going to slow down for 1 second. Don't forget to do your Fretboard Wizard Lesson 2 challenge, which is located in the forum. You can get there by going to the course materials on your Fretboard Wizard course homepage. Click the Fretboard Wizard community. It'll whisk you away, and on the top, you'll see a tab for the Challenge 2 the Fretboard Wizard Lesson 2 Challenge, and you can go ahead and partake in that. I've been working my way through the Challenge 1 stuff. There's some great songs in there and some really great discussion, and it looks like so far that Challenge 2 is about the same. So keep up the good work, hang in there, and until next week, cheers everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much.